the 7th graders the most. I like teaching that age because they're not new to the school, so they're not like so cautious and they're scared of you. And they're not the 8th graders who think they're cooler than you because they're about to be high schoolers. They're kind of in the middle, and you've got the ability to really have good conversations with them. We're so scared of change. We want to do what's always worked. Well, that's not always the best. That's usually not the best mindset, because then we're never going to grow. So like for me, I had to be honest with my kids. Like, hey, there's going to be days where these computers don't work, and we're going to have to figure it out.
About 50% of our teaching as middle school teachers is also the social emotional piece, just how to be a human, how to interact with people properly, how to do things that may be uncomfortable that are going to give you the results that you're looking for. And the handwritten notes is what a nice touch. It's so difficult to have a balance when you're a teacher in the classroom, because you're on the 8 hours a day that you're in the classroom. You are 100% on, because you have 35 kids that you're looking at every single moment, and you're their caretaker for that time. And so that builds so much stress within the body and within the mind, where when you come home from that, you try to let go, but after 180 days of doing so, it really starts to continually build up.
Make my schedule how I want to, and if it doesn't fit for a client, that's okay, because I have some awesome people that I can refer you to that might have space.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Traveling Teacher Podcast, teachers who left the classroom but not education as a whole. Today we have a very special guest. Chris Wickfors is a former middle school teacher who is no stranger to taking leaps in life. Starting off in corporate America to climb the corporate ladder helped Chris realize there was something missing. Chris entered the teaching profession and for 10 years taught, coached baseball, and moved around with his family. All of this and plenty more have taught Chris a fair amount of knowledge in life. Chris now runs his own tutoring company in Florida, where he offers in-person tutoring services to families in need. Chris has 3 children of his own and enjoys the flexible schedule he has created for himself to be able to spend more time with them. Chris, thank you so much for being a guest on the Traveling Teacher Podcast.
Of course, excited to be here. Excited to have this conversation, chat a little bit.
Awesome, man. Yeah, pleasure having you. And I had mentioned to a parent of a student that we tutor here at a Traveling Teacher about the podcast that I have going on. And immediately she got super excited and was like, I have somebody perfect for you, sent you my way. And so thank you again for joining in on this. It's gonna be a blast hearing about everything you got going on.
Definitely. Excited.
Yeah, so tell me where this all started for you.
I do not have an education background educationally. I did not go to school to be a teacher. Graduated from New Jersey, born and raised in Jersey. Been in Florida about 12 years now. But when I went to high school, went to college, but I actually went to college for a business degree. Had really no intention of being in the classroom at all. Had those young dreams of making all the money on Wall Street and being this corporate king climbing the ladder. And here I am now, using some of that business knowledge, running my own tutoring business, but after years in the classroom. So it all began with that business degree. I graduated college in 2009. Right at that point, the economy not doing so hot. Jobs were slim at that point. A lot of people were taking jobs that maybe they wouldn't have, and us college kids were left without a lot of opportunities at that point as the economy was recovering. So I hopped around, and I really got my first taste in the classroom shortly after graduating. I decided I couldn't find a job right away, so I did some substitute teaching. Just needed a degree for that. Really loved being in the classroom, but you hear from everybody, don't be a teacher. You can't make enough money in education. You can't do it. So while doing subbing, I was still really focused on finding that corporate sales something job that would help me more financially more than anything else. That was my main goals as a 18, 19, 20-year-old, was make as much money as I can. But over those years, subbing, doing some odd jobs here and there, applying for jobs in New York City, being from New Jersey, I applied, took the train and then the subway into New York, did a couple interviews. Nothing, but every time I got something or every time I tried something, it didn't give me that passion. I didn't feel that I had the passion I did when I was in the classroom, just as a sub. So right away, it was kind of building in my brain, like maybe this corporate thing ain't for me. Maybe there's something else out there.
I think it's really cool when people start off doing something other than teaching, because one of the things that I've noticed, in the classroom, which for me personally as well, I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but I also wanted to kind of step away and do some other things first. And so I did a lot of different jobs. I did plumbing, landscaping. I was always the Greek pizza boy in the restaurants, so it was always something else. And it really kind of helped me with being in front of the class and doing a lot of things. I mean, how do you think doing all those extra things from the past before you got into the classroom helped you actually be in the classroom and be a better teacher?
Honestly, I think a lot. And I've had students and parents tell me, I feel like just doing something else gave me the knowledge to help students or to talk to students or to have those conversations about other options or just like the world outside of the classroom. It really allowed me to experience those commutes, those things that happen in the real world. And as in today's day and age, the kids are already, middle school kids are thinking about that stuff. They're like, what do I want to do when I get older? It feels like everything's being pushed younger and younger to decide what you want to do. And I feel like those experiences, while I could share my experiences from that world, it also was so beneficial to see you don't got to have it all figured out right now. I spent my years in college thinking I was going to be in the business world. It allowed me to say to the kids, hey, you might go to college for something. I started my freshman year of college as a communications major. I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. But as I went through it, I realized, well, every sports broadcaster seems to be an ex-athlete. So that's probably pretty narrow field. So I transitioned into business and then obviously did the teaching thing. And I'm like, more so than using it as a kind of tool to be like, oh, I have this experience in this field. It was more of you're allowed to change your mind. And that's okay.
That's such a big one. Such a big one. It's such a cool thing for students to hear. And it's very helpful to them. It really brings them comfort to know, because I think in society today, everybody has, or a lot of people have a one-track mind, right? And there's this fear of, I have to do it this way, and this is where I'm going to go. And you really just never know where life takes you. I mean, you have these times in life where you really think about, is this what I want to do long term, or is this something short term that's going to be happening and that may help me kind of gear towards what it is that's going to be coming up for me. And especially for students, especially in the middle school, hearing different things. And like you said, it's not just the experiences that you have in certain areas, it's just general life experiences of doing different things and being able to change. And so that's super cool. Thank you for sharing. So you did middle school. What specifically did you do? What grades and subjects?
So I taught middle school math. I got hired at one school as a assistant math teacher, kind of helping around the classroom, because I was at that point in Hillsborough County in Florida. You can work through a temporary teaching certificate while you're taking the trainings to get the correct paper to be the full professional teacher. So I started with that and did a lot of just helping the kids, and the plan was to transition into the teacher who was retiring's position at that school. Taught there for that first year, and then after that an opportunity came about at a different school that I jumped on because it was very exciting to have the opportunity at the school that the job was being offered. So I jumped over there and I started teaching 7th grade math. Loved teaching 7th graders. I always joked, and I ended up teaching 8th graders as well, but I always joked that I love the 7th graders the most. I like teaching that age because they're not new to the school, so they're not so cautious and they're scared of you. And they're not the 8th graders who think they're cooler than you because they're about to be high schoolers. They're kind of in the middle, and you've got the ability to really have good conversations with them to kind of talk about that growth from last year into what we're doing this year, mathematically, socially, all those conversations before they get to that too cool 8th grade where the dress up days become too cool for them, and this like they're in that age that feels like it was just fun. They were just very fun because they weren't scared, but they also weren't too cocky.
Absolutely. And I knew we would resonate a lot because the seventh grade, I was supposed to be a high school physics teacher, and I had a long-term subbing gig with the seventh grade, and I was like, I'm never leaving. This is my age. These are my people. This is just so much fun. And like you said, they're not new to the middle school. They are, middle year. And I feel as though as kids in general, they really are starting up to being able to have kind of real conversations, and you can be a positive asset to them in their lives when they come up to you after school and they talk to you about their life, and you can just kind of just be real with them, and that's something that's kind of, I would say, pretty tough in the elementary school to the degree that it is in the seventh grade. So that is just super cool. You saw the smile on my face the whole time you were saying that, because I totally agree. And I'm sure, most people that you say to that you were a seventh grade teacher, they're like, what? Why? Like, why would you do that to yourself? But you and I both know the energy, the fun that is a part of that. It can be stressful at times. It's a very interesting age, and yet I think everything is worth it because you just make really cool memories with these kids, and that's yeah.
And you even said the perfect thing. You were like, it's just the age that you can be real with them. Like sixth graders are still hanging on to those elementary school brains, and they're slowly getting there. But like seventh graders are right in that like 13-year-old, like they're starting to experience life as a teenager. It makes the conversations more valuable and more long lasting.
It does. And like you said as well, the eighth grade, I had a lot of seventh grade kids where I walked into their eighth grade classroom and I would notice them and they were just completely different humans. And I'm like, what, who are you? Like, what happened?
Yeah.
But that's just a part of growing up and and getting ready for that high school era. So super cool.
And that being said, I did end my teaching career in the classroom before I transitioned with eighth graders. I was teaching Algebra 1. I was teaching honors level algebra along with an algebra support class. And I love eighth graders. Don't get me wrong. They're amazing. But there's just something about seventh graders that keep me on my toes a little more.
That they definitely do. And again, I really couldn't agree more. So you started off with this, long-term subbing gig to get in with that initial program that you were talking about and to take over for a teacher who is going to be leaving at the end of the year. And for anybody who's listening, who wants to become a teacher or maybe thinking about it in the future, I would say that is most likely the best way to get into a district is just start subbing. Right? Things end up popping up, and once you're a face that is in the school and they see that you're good with kids and you're doing a good job with everything that you're doing, it really makes the hiring process that much easier for them, right? And just like any business in general, things can be pretty competitive depending on the subject that you are trying to enter into. And so literally just going in, and I think in business at times you have to be willing to work for free. But when you go into a classroom and even substitute, you don't have to work for free. Sure, maybe it's a little bit less than what you'd be making as a full-time teacher, but in my opinion, it's a good investment to moving forward into a career that you're trying to get into. So I totally, I agree with that. And so you left that one to go to the next school. So was it 2 districts total that you taught at?
It's actually one district. It's the same district. It was a different school. Down here in Florida, districts are humongous. I'm from New Jersey, where each town had a district. Down here, it's counties have districts, and Hillsborough County has, I don't know, I think last count they said like 250,000 students in it or something. So wow. That was the big change for me growing up in a small town in New Jersey. Like we had like an elementary school, a middle school, a high school. I went to a private high school and 2 years of middle school, but like it was much smaller, which made my transition in Hillsborough County was from a Title I school. Kids it wasn't a neighborhood school per se. It was more of kids being bussed in from different areas. It had half of a magnet program for robotics. I was teaching, not in the magnet program, but I was teaching more so just the math classes. I was a support class for math when I started subbing. And then I transitioned into a completely different type of world. The challenges are different. I saw the challenges from one environment to another environment, and it ain't easy. No matter what kind of school you're in, you're gonna have some challenges. And it was one district, but because the district is so large, wildly different populations of students, wildly different experiences with parents and kids and colleagues, and there's such a change. 20 minutes down the road, and it's a different world. Really, it's really interesting in down here because of the size of the district. You can teach in two different schools in the same district and think you're in a completely different world.
That's so fascinating. I mean, growing up in Massachusetts and New England is very similar to what you grew up in New Jersey, right? Just districts. Every town had a district, and that was kind of what it was. So it's kind of crazy to hear that it's county-wide and you can really bounce around. And for sure, going from one town to the next, you see a lot of differences. And, how was that for you in terms of seeing those differences between the different classes? I mean, it must have been very interesting to see with the students and the parents as well.
I'm very happy I had both experiences. I value both experiences equivalently because they both gave me so many tools to deal with different situations because of socio-demographics and the socioeconomics of things and their different worlds. But at the end of the day, these kids are just trying to do their best. They're really just... A lot of kids they're from their environments at home. They come to us. It's our job to guide them. We can't, like the old saying about the horse, we can do our best to bring them there, but we can't force them to do it. But having the experience with working with kids that may not have valued education like some others was a really good experience to me because it was so valuable that it made me, in my transition to the newer school, the one that I taught at for the end of my teaching career in the classroom before switching to virtual, it made me appreciate some of these things and it allowed me to have conversations with these kids like, hey, there's worlds outside of this classroom and there's worlds outside of this neighborhood, and it's important to see it. It's important to experience it because the real world, there's a lot out there and there's a lot of differences just 20 minutes up the road.
Absolutely. And again, pointing to how we started this off with you going from the corporate world into teaching and doing a bunch of different things before you got in and being able to share that with your kids, you also are able to share what you just mentioned, which is going from a town to a different town and just describing the differences. I'm sure you even described the differences between New Jersey and Florida multiple times throughout your teaching career. And it really just offers this kind of glimpse, this window in for the students that they may have never been able to see before. And again, that's such a value and such an important piece of being a good teacher, is being able to integrate reality into your classroom, right? And so it's very clear that you've definitely done that, and that's really great. So was there a particular style of teaching you enjoyed the most? A lot of teachers talk about flipped classrooms. A lot of teachers talk about just different styles. Was there anything in particular that you had in mind?
So in the beginning of my teaching career, all I knew was how I was taught. You don't know. I didn't go to the traditional, which I think is actually a benefit. I didn't go through an education program. So I didn't know what was truly expected, per se, in the classroom. But in the beginning, I taught like I learned in my schooling, because that's all I had to go off of. So it was, I'm going to teach you something, you're going to practice it. I'm going to teach. But then as I spoke to colleagues, and that's the one thing about education is, oh my goodness, the amount of knowledge you get from the people you work with is unmatched. It's unbelievable what you learn from the random conversations you have in the hallway about how a lesson went, or what they're doing differently that might work for them, and how open people are in this field in education to share and steal. It's welcomed. Please steal my idea. So that in that regard, I started just like that, but then I grew, and I was actually offered the opportunity, I think it was probably in my 5th year, there was a grant program that was going to allow a few teachers to have a full one-to-one device in their classroom. And I was very, very happy and honored. My principal asked me to be one of those teachers that was going to receive these computers. She was like, do you want to do it? And I was like, yes, please, let's figure this out. Because for me, other math teachers, other it might be intimidating. Like, how do I use computers in my math class? How do I do this? But for me, I was like, let's go. I'll figure it out. And she knew I was very forward thinking and wanted to implement as much technology as I could in my classroom. So once that happened, I like to say I did kind of a modified flipped classroom. The computers didn't go home with them, but in the school that I worked at, the majority of students had devices at home. Thankfully, another thing we've talked about, that not all students have that luxury, but they did. So I call it a modified flipped classroom because I don't fully believe that making the kids do all of the prep work at home is exactly valuable for them. But I did have them at least look ahead. My plan was always, I don't want you to come tomorrow with no idea what we're going to talk about, because then I'm going to waste so much time in the classroom explaining what we're about to do that I'm not going to get to the valuable part of the lesson. So now, again, kids are middle schoolers. That's where you have to build that mutual respect and trust. Like, hey, I'm doing my part, I need you to do yours, which is where that relationship really, in that flipped classroom idea, the kids got to trust you. Because if they don't, they're going to come unprepared. So I did that. I made them like, hey, we're going to be doing this topic tomorrow. I want you to go home, just look through the notes I've posted on, at that time it was Edsby, posted the notes, look through them. And then how I was kind of seeing who was doing it is they knew some days they would get like a 3 or 4 question quiz just about a very general idea about what we're about to talk about today. So that kind of kept them on their heels, like, oh crap, I probably should do this because he's going to ask me a question and I don't want to be the one kid in class that has no idea what we're about to talk about. So that was very, very valuable because it allowed me to spend my 40-minute chunk of time jumping right in. And I would always give the bell work, a lot of days would be like, hey, just in case, if something happened yesterday, because another thing, as I transitioned later into my life, I am not a believer of homework. I'm not a homework person. The only homework my kids ever had in the classroom after I figured out that I wasn't a homework person was finish today's classwork or just look ahead, take 5-10 minutes, read what we're going to do tomorrow. That was it. So I would always start class with, hey, I know life happens. If you didn't have a chance to look at the notes last night, spend 3 or 4 minutes talking to your partner. See what they got from last night. Because things happen, life happens. And I feel like that's why I have been able to start such a successful tutoring business, because I right away, kids knew I valued their time. I valued their time at home because you're already in school for 8 hours. So that little modified classroom, it gave them a little bit of something at home, but it was more so to make sure they're ready for tomorrow. It wasn't just, here's 10 questions just because that you're going to photo math or cheat on anyway. I mean, at the end of the day. So
yeah,
that was big. That was big for me. That was a big thing. So definitely that modified flip, like, hey, do a little bit of legwork for me because I'm going to prep you and I'm going to make sure you're ready to do it. But I need you to do a little something for me first.
for sure. I think what an awesome thing. I mean, I've learned so much from, doing these podcasts with people like yourself and just all of the different options both in and out of the classroom, right? And I think the idea of a modified flipped classroom where you have first of all, the no homework thing is great, right? If it works for you and your teaching style and you feel as though the kids respect you more for it, and especially because even in middle school now, kids are so busy. Kids are no longer really, I don't want to say they're no longer kids, but their time is just so structured and they have so much going on from a very young age that I think it's a real breath of fresh air for them to say, wow, this teacher is not going to give me an extra half hour of something or an hour of something to do every night for the entire school year. That's going to give me a lot for me and for whatever else I have going on in life, right? I mean, life can be tough sometimes. Whatever is happening in life, in every student's life can be time consuming and whatnot. Yeah. So, it's super cool to hear about, the modified classroom style and how you had it going. And yeah, thank you for sharing that.
And I think by doing that, early on or before the COVID times, being able to it was easier for me as a teacher to transition into that style because I was already kind of prepping myself, looking ahead, like, not that anything that I knew that was going to happen, but looking ahead to like, hey, technology is going to be the way. I got to figure out how to do it in here because there's no fighting it.
Yeah, and what a great thing to be able to jump into it. And basically, in our initial conversation, you mentioned when it came to teaching, you were kind of a yes man, like, let's do it. Whatever it is, let's hop in and let's figure it out, because I think that's something that, again, points to somebody who is hyper curious of a system, right? As the educational system, for example, and trying to figure out all angles and aspects and what is coming down the pipe. And being able to do all of that is it's amazing. And so yeah, when you got the laptops and you were able to do that with your kids, it was something that you're like, hey, let's do it. Let's figure it out. It's not going to be perfect in the beginning, but I'm sure it ended up working out very well for you. And you're kind of a leader within that district at that point, and you can figure things out for everybody else. So that's super.
And that's
cool.
the big thing when it comes to change, when we're so scared of change, like we want to do what's always worked. Well, that's not always the best. That's usually not the best mindset, because then we're never going to grow. So like for me, I had to be honest with my kids, like, hey, there's going to be days where these computers don't work and we're going to have to figure it out. And you know what? That's going to happen when you get out of here too. Like, we're just going to have to, there might be days where it's going to crash and burn everything I had planned, and we're going to have to be flexible. And so I think leading up with that with the kids, like, hey, it stopped the, oh my God, this isn't working freakouts when bad days happen. Because it goes back to just being honest. They just want you to be real. They just want to talk to you. They just want to know, like, all right, well, what's going to happen today? Well, it might be a disaster, and we'll figure it out.
Absolutely. And being able to preview that with them and just let them know that it's okay when things don't work out the way we plan. Things may go awry, and we just have to take it in stride and do with it what we can, right? And so another really important life lesson, and especially towards taking risks and trying something new, is exactly that, right? Things are going to go wrong. Things are not going to go to plan, and yet we learn from those situations, and so we have to take them with a certain type of grace that is necessary for us to actually be able to learn the lesson that is coming from that adversity or mishap or anything at all. So I totally agree. And just from these 26 minutes that we've been doing this, I can't even imagine how much your students learned. It sounds like you were such a well-rounded teacher with all of your experiences and your ability to explain these things to them in such a way that helped them feel at ease with whatever was coming down the line, especially with that modified flipped classroom you were talking about, where you allowed them to preview something beforehand. Because coming into something blind, sure, it's good, but also coming in somewhat prepared of at least an idea of what is coming in the next day gives people a lot of comfort, and it allows them to be curious and sleep on some ideas. And I'm sure you had a lot of that, where whatever concept or something may have been the most exciting, I'm sure the students were thinking about it at night and kind of came in with questions of what are we going to be doing today.
For sure. That's the big thing. It's like, I can't help you if you don't know how you need to be helped or what you want. Like, I can't read your minds. I always joke with them, like, I don't want to read your 7th grade, 8th grade mind. Trust me, I don't want to be in there.
Yeah.
But so you got to tell me. And I think that gave them the confidence, like, because that's the other thing about previewing those lessons, as we talked about. It gives kids confidence to raise their hand, because they're not raising their hand blindly. It's like, wait a second, I do remember this from last night a little bit. So just those little things definitely play a huge role in them trusting you to learn. They need to trust you to learn.
Absolutely. Definitely. Tell us about your classroom. What did it look like? Was it rows? Was it groups? What did the surroundings look like? So
again, in the beginning, it was, let's do columns and rows, and let me just give you a bunch of information and see if you can recite it back to me. That's how when I was in school, that's how I learned. But as I transitioned to the flipped class, or the computer classroom, and having those devices, I saw the value in small groups. So I had my classroom almost set up like almost like a stadium. It was kind of, I was up there, I had the board, but then I had like groups of 3 on like diagonals on the side, a couple groups of 2 in the middle. My desk in the back of the classroom, because that I didn't really use that very much because I was very active and up. So I wanted to move I almost didn't even want a desk in my classroom. It just took up space. And it gave me it almost gives you the idea like, well, I can sit down, but I don't want to, but it's there. So I kind of pushed that to the corner. But I definitely left space back there. My big thing was there was space back there that if a student was having trouble, or if a student needed to talk, or if a student had a question that they didn't want to ask their group mate, it was away from everybody enough that they could feel confident that they could ask me without judgment. And that's my big thing in the classroom, and that's where I really tried to stress to the students with the devices is, hey, if you want to ask me a question, you have the ability right in front of you to write me a message, and nobody has to know you even asked it. And when I address it, they knew I wasn't going to say, Johnny said this to me in a message. So like that setup in the classroom allowed them, if they needed to, they could ask their partners, but having those devices was so valuable to giving them the idea that like, well, I know he's going to get to me. I know he's going to answer it because I can always ask it. So having those devices, having the setup with their partners, having all of that easy access to get back to the computer table if they needed to go grab a charger or things like that was important to me, because flow of the classroom, it's hard. Your space is restricted, and how you set up your classroom, I learned from other colleagues and stuff, can do a lot for how you're like when they walk in on that first day of school. That classroom setup is the first thing they see, and they're like, oh, I'm gonna love this one, or oh, we're just gonna get those. They know right away.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure when they walked into that classroom and saw the different types of setups you had with the desks, they saw the computer, they saw your desk in the back. I agree that one thing I miss the most about teaching, or one of the many things that I miss the most about teaching, is just moving around all day. I mean, how many miles did we walk in that classroom? But it's great. It keeps them engaged. And when you're so passionate about the teaching, you don't even want to sit down. Like you said, you don't even want that desk. I never wanted one either. I was never there. It was always just something to kind of keep my papers on and kind of have everything in one spot. But that moving around, it adds this sort of this piece to the lesson where they're kind of listening in different distances wherever you may be, and they know that you're walking around, and they know that you're really engaged with them and in the class, right? And so that's I agree.
One of the other big things about my classroom setup was like I learned this in the business world actually prior. I hated talking to my boss when he was on the other side of his desk. I don't like you're better than me because you're behind the big desk. So my desk had a student desk next to it where students could sit next to me and we would go over things. And I feel like a lot of teachers are really good at that, but like it's intimidating if they're like staring at you. You're behind your desk with all these folders and your pen and your Post-its and you're writing down. And so like I think just little things like moving that desk to the side where we're together. We're working on this together. It's not a me versus you. It's not a me and you. I'm not supposed to be telling you what to do. We're working together on this. Like, this is us. This is how we are going to answer your question, more than I'm going to tell you how to do it from the other side of my big bad desk.
So yeah, let me ask you this, and we're going to get into your tutoring in a moment, but do you feel the same exact way when you're doing the in-person tutoring? Where are those lessons typically done, and are you on the same side of the table with them?
Good. So I work a lot with small groups, mostly with small groups. And I work out of the local Starbucks, local Panera, local Dunkin'. So I'm also a big believer in leaving that in that environment up to the kid. The seats are open. It's hard to always sit next to them because of the environment of 3 or 4 kids, like whether I have a circle table open or a rectangle or etc. So like some kids prefer like, hey, right here next to me, so it's easier. Some kids prefer across. Generally with groups of 2 or 3, I have like one next to me, 2 across, one on the other side of me. I think it's also a little different when you're sitting at a Starbucks table versus the teacher's desk in the classroom. So it's a lot less intimidating when we're looking at each other. in that environment.
For sure, absolutely, and I am super excited to talk about your tutoring business and the groups, because it's something a little bit different than what I'm doing. So I'm super curious to hear about that. And just a couple more questions before we kind of start transitioning into that. I mean, what was your favorite part of teaching in the classroom?
I always I tell colleagues, or I tell past students, and I'm like, I taught math. Okay, yes. At the end of the day, my job was to teach you math. That was my goal. That was my goal, to make you advance mathematically. But my favorite parts of the classroom were never about math. My favorite times in the classroom were the homeroom kids coming in early, or seeing me on the courtyard and having conversations about the basketball game last night or their football. Like, it's so hard to really explain to non-teachers the value of the stuff that has nothing to do with your curriculum. Like, it's so, and they're like, well, you're supposed to teach them math. And I'm like, there's so much more to being a teacher than teaching them your lesson. And we all know that, and a lot of people know that, and they want to see it. But my favorite part about being in the classroom was just talking to the kids. It was really just, no, and I know, because when I was a kid in the classroom, thinking back, maybe my teachers taught differently than we do today. Maybe the strategies were not as technologically advanced, but the teachers that I was able to just go by their desk and be like, hey, what's going on? Especially in high school, and as you get older in middle school, those are the names that I remember now. Those are the teachers that it's like, and it's so cliche to say, like, they're never going to remember your lesson, but they'll remember you. But like, it's so true in education. Like, my students are they going to remember the quadratic formula? Maybe the kids that go to be a math teacher, but they are going to remember, hey, he wrote me that note at the end of the school year. I was in my classroom, my favorite part, end of the year, I wrote personalized handwritten notes to all my students. Like, wow. I had 140 students, and I wrote handwritten notes to every single one of them. And even today, as recent as a month ago, I had a parent text me and say, hey, so-and-so is just cleaning out his room to go to college, and he found your note from 8th grade. And she sent me a picture of it. And like, so for me, those little things were my favorite part. Seeing their reactions, like, wait a second, this is for me? Like, you wrote me a note. Like, yeah, because at the end of the day, I'm going to remember you. I'm not going to remember if you got an A, B, C, D. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you're working hard, you're trying hard. Did you leave my class a better person than you came into it in August? Yeah. Like, that's what mattered to me. And that's really why, again, as we move into the tutoring talk, that's why I feel like I have been able to do this successfully, because I built that trust that, yes, he's going to teach me math. I'm going to learn math, but he understands that I'm not a math student. I'm a person. I'm a kid.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that personal connection that you build with students, and especially in middle school, I think that the about 50% of our teaching as middle school teachers is also the social emotional piece, just how to be a human, how to interact with people properly, how to do things that may be uncomfortable that are going to give you the results that you're looking for. And the handwritten notes is what a nice touch. I mean, I'm sure those kids absolutely held on to those. Like you said, you just had a parent reaching out recently that the kid's going to college, and they found that letter. And it's something that it really kind of brings you, it's like music, right? If you listen to something 10 years ago and it pops up again and you hear it, you go right back to that time, right? And especially for a student transitioning from high school into college, for them to be able to see that handwritten note from you, somebody who I'm sure they respected very much and enjoyed being in the classroom with, to kind of comfort them to when they're going into college, they're like, something, it's all going to be good, and so that is what a cool story. All of that is really amazing. What was your least favorite part of teaching in the classroom?
The stuff, I mean, honestly, I would say the observations, and I always used to, like, I was not a dog and pony show kind of person. I like literally had conversations with my principal. I'm like, hey, I'm going to teach how I teach. Sure, I'll maybe plan a little extra here, but I feel like I'm a really good teacher. And I value your feedback, but at the end of the day, I know my kids value me regardless of what your rubric tells you that I'm doing. And so for me, it was just and even seeing other colleagues, like the stress of those observations, and like we're freaking out. And I'm like, the stress of those observations alone is going to make our lesson worse and less valuable. So the lack of trust that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, I guess, and the lack of, and I was very valued with great administration who trusted me through and through. They had their observations. They have to check the boxes, but that's where teaching can be a little, I was very thankful. So a lot of people would say my least favorite of teaching is my micromanaging admin or something. I never had that. My admin kind of they knew I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. But in general, seeing the stress of other teachers as observations approach and things like that, it's like, I wish we didn't have to do this. I wish we could just be trusted to teach these kids. And I know there has to be some kind of checks and balances and evaluations and stuff, but at the end of the day, like I didn't like them because I don't agree with some of the rubric. I don't agree that's the best thing to be doing sometimes. They're so situational. All of the check boxes are like the answer to the level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 with this student may be a completely different level 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5. And you can call these observations unbiased and they're good for all kids. But at the end of the day, the kid, you don't know my relationship with that kid in the classroom from the last 3 months to be able to judge it based on 25 minutes. So that was the hard part.
What a good point at the end of that. I mean, it's so true, right? We take the time to get to know each individual student and see them where they're at and help them progress, where it is that they can progress to within a certain time frame. And yeah, exactly. I mean, 25 minutes of an observation really isn't going to show how much progress that kid may have made, right? And I agree. I think the lack of trust can be something that a lot of teachers get turned off by, and it really tends to throttle that passion, right? Because there are so many passionate teachers out there, and when these things come up and all the stress comes up like you were talking about, it really kind of tends to thwart the fire a little bit. And, I think that the school system, I say it all the time, the school system, because of the population of, let's just say, the United States, the school system is meant for the masses, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there has to be structures in place, but I think that good teachers like yourself kind of get a little, I don't want to say, I'll just say annoyed with that kind of stuff, because it's things that you're like, hey, I'm already doing this, don't worry about it. But also, I feel as though those are good pieces as individual teachers that show you like, hey, maybe there's something else out there. Maybe those adversities that I'm feeling right now and that stress that I'm feeling from this, or the frustration or whatever it may be, maybe that is pointing me into something new. And so that's kind of what we're leading into right now. I mean, talk to us about the leap from the classroom into what you're doing now.
So a little bit of backstory about how tutoring started. So I have 3 little boys at home. I have a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old. My ex-wife and I are separated, but we co-parent like champs. We're doing really well with the kids. The kids are thriving. But when I was teaching, we decided as a family, when we were together, the financial stress of daycare didn't make sense because we were both teachers, to basically be paying somebody else to raise our kids when it was just basically our paycheck going to pay those other people. So we made a decision as a family I would continue teaching. She would stay home with the kids, and great, like wonderful. The dynamics were perfect. But I also saw that, while we weren't paying daycare, replacing a second salary to pay the bills is challenging. So I started dabbling in tutoring. At that point, I was going to individual houses, just students really from the year before, etc. One-on-one tutoring 10, 20 kids maybe every couple weeks, just to make some extra income. As things grew and as I continued, my name continued to grow, and like, hey, my kid is excelling with him working one-on-one or small group, the workload got a little bit more. So I was I ended up towards the end of my time in the classroom working before school from 6 a.m. to 8:30 a.m., teaching from 8:30 to 4, coaching. I mentioned in the beginning coaching baseball, but I actually coach basketball, flag football. So I coached those from like 4:30 to 6, and then I would go across the street to Starbucks and tutor until they closed. So I was doing a lot of legwork with the goal kind of in the back of my mind, like this would be really cool to do full time one day. So I spent 6 years working 80 hours. I was literally working. I left my house at 6 a.m. I got home at 10 p.m. I was just working. And we had a joke in my house. My kids would joke when they were little. They would ask my ex-wife, like, is daddy sleeping over this weekend? Because like I would see them on weekends. I would see them Saturday morning or Friday night to Sunday night. And then it was like, see you next weekend. So that was it for a long time. And I would tell parents at their houses, I had one parent that ran his own business and he was trying to grow his own business in a different world. And he was like, you ever see you doing this full time? And I was like, I would love to do this full time. Like, it would be amazing. And that was 7 years ago, probably 6, 7, 8 years ago, right when I started taking on some tutor kids. And I was like, yeah, I would love to work on this full time. And he actually messaged me a couple months back, and he sent me a message to my Facebook Messenger, because we're Facebook friends. And he said, I remember the conversation we had 8 years ago where you were like, you want to do this full time. And he was like, props to you. Congrats. You did it. So that's where I was still teaching. I was tutoring. COVID hit. We transitioned to whatever you want to call it, virtual and hybrid and whatever name your district community wanted to call it. And I got a taste of being at home. I got a taste of seeing my kids in the morning, because I was working in my room during the March after spring break of 2020, which was when I had the student who gave you my name or to reach out to. I had her as an 8th grader. She was one of my 8th graders during COVID, and it was cut short spring break, and we never went back. So we went virtual, and I got a taste of like, hey, I can help kids and see my kids. So that was a big light bulb for me. And then after that, I made the really, really hard decision to leave the school I was at in like the second week of school. An opportunity came up with Florida Virtual School. And I went to my principal and I was like, hey, I have given everything to this school for 7, 8 years. I got to do something for myself and my family now. I was honest. I was like, hey, this opportunity came. I'm going to pursue it. I'm going to go for the interview. It was great. They offered me the job. I gave my 2 weeks notice, and I felt awful. It was one of the hardest decisions to make, is to leave a school that you loved. Like, I didn't leave for any other reason than for personal reasons. And that's hard as a teacher. We struggle with that. Yeah. We struggle with putting ourselves first. So that was really, really hard to me, but I made the decision. I went to Florida Virtual. So I got to work from home for a while, but at the same time, with the flexibility of the virtual world, I was able to pick up in a couple extra tutorings here and there, and I was still working those long hours. And I got to a point after a couple of years with Florida Virtual, I was like, it's time. Like, it was right after, it was when we decided that the divorce was going to happen, and it was like, you know what, life's changing here. I think I need to make a life change there, because for me, it became it was an opportunity to, now that I'm only going to have my kids half the time, working all of these hours is going to take even more of that limited time away. So I decided at that point, I was like, you know what, with this split custody with my kids, I want to be there more. I need to be there more. And I had built enough of a reputation in the community, and I am so thankful for that job, because I wouldn't have, without being offered that position 10 years ago, like, this wouldn't have happened, because I was extremely grateful for the community and the support. And then as my name got bigger, it was like every Facebook post, I need a math tutor, my name was first. And I was like, all right, I'm there. It's time. So I decided, and I had a really supportive AP with Florida Virtual. And I will never forget what he told me when I told him I was leaving, because they didn't want me to go. I mean, I was a valuable part of their team. And he was like, you know what? I'm so glad you're doing something for yourself. He was so supportive. And my admin in the past has always been supportive. Of course they don't want to lose good teachers, but this comment, he was really just so supportive. And like, hey, he literally sent me an email back, and when I sent him my resignation letter, he's like, hey man, good for you. He said it was like, I envy you. I want to do this. Because he's in the world of, he does a lot of physical training on the side with kids and football and wrestling, and he's like, I want to start my own gym. And so it almost was like I was almost an inspiration allow him to be like, well, good for you, man, you chase your dreams.
It is, and it is inspirational. It's something that I think with COVID, of course, there was definitely some tough stuff for a lot of people, but I think there was silver lining where a lot of people kind of woke up to the like, what am I doing here? Like, am I doing things for myself? Am I doing things for my family in a way that, is great for us? And like you said before, a lot of teachers have a lot of guilt and they don't put themselves first or their families first because we have all these kids that we want to serve in the best way possible. And it can be tough getting away from that as well. But again, and for anybody who's listening, anybody who's a teacher who's thinking of potentially moving on to something different, your personal well-being and the well-being of your family matters the most. It does not mean that you have to leave education as a whole, as is very clear today with Chris. And there are options out there, and this is where this podcast got started in the first place, right? Is because, especially even for myself, when I left, I wasn't sure what I was going to do afterwards. I had some travel dreams and whatnot, but after that, I was just letting it be and letting it see what was going to happen. And I think the coolest part of this podcast here is seeing all these different options that people have going on. And again, so any teachers who are listening who may feel as though they are ready to make a transition into something different, this is another one of those amazing stories. And like you said, you just kind of knew it was time, right? And I feel as though we have a lot of anxieties as humans of like, well, am I going to know what's coming up next or this or that? And I really feel as time goes by, I feel more so that we understand at some points in life when it's time to move on from something or whatever the case may be. And we just have to listen to it. Whatever is supposed to come will come, and we have to fight. And it's not easy by any means to transition from a steady job into something different. But in my case, and it definitely sounds like yours as well, it is totally worth it.
Yeah, 100% worth it. People are like, well, do you regret it? And I'm like, no, I don't regret anything. Do I miss the classroom? 100%. You will. Every teacher, whether you stay, whether you go, every summer you get, because the summer is the end of the year. And yes, you miss being in the classroom, and I miss being in the classroom all the time. But I don't regret doing something for myself. I don't regret doing something for my family. And that didn't make me a worse teacher because I made a choice for me.
For sure. And I think that's a really big one, again, for people who are listening, is exactly what you just said. I mean, that is just so important. And how nice to have had, that principal at the Florida Virtual School that was very supportive of what it was that you were doing. I feel as though a lot of administrators are like that, and I think the good administrators understand that life happens, things happen in life changes day by day, minute by minute, and when you allow somebody to come in and do the time that they feel as though they were good at doing and then moving on from there, I think that is one of the many pieces that makes a good administrator, is allowing people to pursue things and actually kind of help them along with that transition. So it sounds like you had that, which is great. And we really kind of touched on this, but if there's anything else that you wanted to kind of add to it, I mean, how did this transition help your relationships with the people around you and, more importantly, yourself?
It changed a lot. The people around me, like they will tell you, my parents will tell you, my students will tell you, my tutoring kids, like, it's just, there's more of a breath of fresh air. Like, I still, like, I struggle with anxiety. I struggle with all those things that as a human, like, I'm on anxiety meds. Like I am trying, and I work, and I go to, and I have a therapist, and I have counseling, and I am so happy that, because the transition to this was scary. I got to pay the bills. It was scary because I got to make sure I still have an income. I now have to pay my own taxes. I have to figure all this stuff out. So it's made me see, almost because I'm not as busy, that I could use some help in other cases with relationships. And so it's almost like a different take on, yes, it's helped my relationships because I have more time, but it's also helped my relationships because I now have time to help myself. I now have time to seek out like ways to be better with my kids, and ways to be better, because we're so busy and we're nonstop and we do all these things. And when you're working those long days, it's hard to give yourself grace. It's hard to be like, well, I'm struggling here with my relationships, but I don't have time to figure out why. Or like, so that's for me like a big piece. While in general, I'm more available, I have time, I see my kids more in divorce than I did when I was married because of the dynamics of life. But it's really more so the relationship with myself. It's given me the time to see I needed a therapist to help me kind of talk about things. I was struggling in areas that I couldn't see because I just worked. I just worked to block it out. I would tutor from 6 a.m. and I'd get home at 10 p.m. I didn't have to deal with it. So with myself, that's how it's helped my relationship with myself. It's given me the time and ability to reflect.
I mean, Chris, that's all like truly poetic. I mean, I think everything that you've described is just truly amazing. And it's so difficult to have a balance when you're a teacher in the classroom, because you're on the 8 hours a day that you're in the classroom, you are 100% on, because you have 35 kids that you're looking at every single moment, and you're their caretaker for that time. And so that builds so much stress within the body and within the mind, where when you come home from that, you try to let go, but after 180 days of doing so, it really starts to continually build up. And so again, making that choice to give yourself the time and the freedom to actually be able to work on those human experiences that most 99% of people experience, right, is so important and crucial. And again, pointing back to what we said before, a teacher's number one priority should be themselves, because you cannot help from an empty cup. You have to have yourself good to some degree in order to be able to help people with whatever it is that you're trying to help them with. And so it's very clear that you have given yourself that opportunity, and that, a lot of things have changed for the better. And I do agree. I mean, I am a totally different human being from when I started the tutoring company to when I was a teacher in the past. And I think the beauty of it is that, again, just because you leave the classroom does not mean that you have to leave working with kids. It doesn't mean you have to leave education, because it's very clear that you and so many other people are so passionate about education, but really can't take all of the things that the system brings with it, right? And so it's a very noble thing to be able to step away from and take care of yourself. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's incredible. It is. Yeah, and so, kind of a few more questions here, and just sort of towards wrapping up. But I mean, what is one thing you'd like to see change about the current public education system?
To put it short and sweet, like, I really get frustrated because even in the 10 years I was a teacher, the things that we are pushing down to the younger grades, and the push for quantity over quality is a struggle for me, because I don't remember when I was a kid, but it feels like we're putting so much on these kids' plates. It's impossible for them to truly master anything. Like, it's really hard and I get it. Like, there's money involved, and we want to get them all in the AP courses, and we want to get them all this, because the a bit like Algebra 1, for example. I taught Algebra 1, 8th graders. Great. Okay. When I was in high school, I took Algebra 1 in 9th grade. Like, as that's become an 8th grade subject, even though it's a high school credit course. Little things like that. It's like we're not realizing that scientifically kids' brains aren't ready for some of this stuff yet. Like, it's not because they can't, or it's not because they don't want to. It's like literally they can't think abstractly all the time. They don't have that ability yet at 12, 13, even 14. Like, we don't. So like we keep pushing this, and even down into kindergarten. I have a kindergartner, one that just got out of kindergarten and one that got out of 1st grade. And my 1st grader is super duper gifted. He tested gifted. He really is. He's super at math. Like I literally sit with my 7-year-old and I'm like, what's 9 times 8 minus 50? And he'll tell me in 3 seconds. Like, I'm like, goodness, You're 7. So he's super bright and intelligent, but I'm like, I don't want him. And they talk to us about pushing him up a grade level, and we are going to accelerate him in math only. But I'm like, I don't want him to be in 3rd grade all the way next year because he's not ready emotionally. And like, we're pushing all this stuff down. Like you hear kindergartners, like the structure of kindergarten. Like, kindergarten's not supposed to be structured. Like, kids aren't supposed to know how to follow a schedule. Like, they're learning. Like there's so much being pushed lower that in my mind, it's too much. It's just a lot. I wish there was a change, and I wish there was a shift to focus on, hey, let's focus on a few good things and make them really freaking good, instead of making them okay at 50 different topics and stressing teachers to cover 900 units in a year. And we're getting all these state tests, and we're pushing back, and we're like, teachers are scrambling because they're like doing unit 10 in a day when it's supposed to take 10 days because they're out of time, because they're not allowing teachers the time to truly teach the material. They're not giving, and it's a disservice to the kids, because the kids, they're going to be okay. They're resilient. They're kids, but are they really learning what's important, or are they just learning it to get through? And that's really my struggle with, and it's not, you could say public education, you could say education in general. It's that idea that we really want these kids to grow up before they're scientifically ready to grow up. Like, we have brains that need time to develop, and just because the education world, somebody in a suit somewhere says we can teach a 6th grader this topic because we want to get it out of the way so that they can take AP courses by sophomore year instead of junior, senior year, it doesn't mean we're doing that any value. Let's focus on a few good things and make these kids excel and help them find quality education, instead of just throwing a bunch of spaghetti and hope they learn most of it at a average level.
Unbelievable. I couldn't agree more. And your passion truly shines through with what it is that you're talking about. And again, I think it's really important to have this perspective for anybody who's listening, because it is. I mean, if you think about, 10, 20 years ago, things were not as rushed, and they just become more and more rushed every single day. And I think it's just kind of similar to where society is heading as a whole, is that, people are not given the time to do what it is that they want to do or should do or want to focus on, or whatever the case may be. And we have to really take a step back in adult life and kind of do those things for ourselves, but we also have to do it for the generations below us. And we have to understand that every student is different, and wherever they are is good, right? And the stress of the teaching, like you said, you have a unit that you get through in a day instead of 10 because you're running out of time, and you're just stressed in general of that deadline. All of these things that you're talking about, I think, are spot on. And one thing I forgot to ask about, is tell us a little bit more about the group work and the tutoring that you're doing. So, what grades are you dealing with? And yeah, I mean, the group thing sounds really cool. So talk to us about all that.
So I tutor pretty much everything from 6th grade through high school, and then into college algebra and a couple college level courses. I just skipped calculus because I'm a math-minded person, but I cannot wrap my head around. I tutor pre-calc, but I'm like, I have some colleagues that are really good at calculus, and I'm like, here, my kids did great in pre-calc, but I've laughed with parents and kids, and I'm like, you don't tutor calc? Well, I'm not taking it next year then. I'm taking some, so that's where kids literally don't take calc because I don't tutor it.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I have great colleagues, etc. So I tutor 6th through 12th grade. I do a lot. I do a lot of back work to make sure my groups are valuable for the students. So I work with my kids, and I work in 30-minute sessions. I'm different than many of the tutors that work in hour sessions. And the reason I have shifted to 30-minute sessions is because of what I've learned about kids' attention spans, honestly. I feel like I was almost towards, like, after the 40-minute mark, I feel like I'm almost taking money sometimes because the kids are at that point starting to check out a little bit. And I know, like, I try my best to engage them, but again, with their brain, the kids are designed to only think for a certain amount of time fully on. So that combined with just the demands, and I really want to help as many kids as I want, and I found that I could still do it valuably in a 30-minute chunk. Some of those higher level students, the SATs, sometimes I get hour groups or hour sessions. I realize that sometimes pre-calc might take an hour session some weeks, so I kind of fluctuate my schedule. But I work really hard in trying to put my groups not only same grade level, but I try my best to get them same teacher, because most of my students are from the neighborhood, the community that I worked in. So they generally go to the same high school or the same middle school right now at the level I tutor. I probably have on my school year schedule about 120 kids regularly, and then 20 or 30 that will pop in as needed on a cancellation for a test, etc. But the groups, I work really, really freaking hard to try to not only get sixth grade math together, but sixth grade math that has Mr. Smith. Or I work really hard behind the scenes, which is why it's been so hard for me to kind of go to like a scheduling app, or people are like, why don't you use a scheduling app? We'll sign up. It's because like no app can organize it the way that I do. Like I have an Excel spreadsheet that is color coded, that is like Mr. Johnson, they're purple. That doesn't exist. Like I can't do it that way. And I've even asked for feedback. I'm a big believer in feedback making us better people. I did it in the classroom. I was a teacher that literally every few weeks would send a poll out on Edsby like, hey, how am I doing? What can I do differently? And I've asked parents in this world, in this business, like, hey, would you prefer being able to sign up as needed? Do you like the way I do it? And the majority are like, I love the way you do it because it's more valuable for my kid. And it doesn't work for everybody. Some people are but for me personally, it's just the way I design my groups. It's really hard to hand off the power to an automated system.
Couldn't agree more.
So it's hard. And so that's like my groups. I really try, and it's not always going to be perfect. There are going to be students, but I've obviously, as the numbers show, like these kids are still finding value in it. There's value in groups. I do try to, there's some parents and I have conversations and they're like, my kid just can't work in a group. And I'm like, all right, let me see if I can find a one-on-one spot to put in between two groups. It's not that I'm only groups, but I am a lot of groups, because this is where the personal side of it comes into, like financially, like it makes more sense. Efficiency, it makes more sense to get more kids in. It makes more sense for me, my time, I have learned, is valuable. Like, I mean, that's where people will be like, well, no, like I know what I'm worth and I know that I can make it work for them. So, but if it doesn't work for you, great. There's plenty of other tutors that can fit you in one-on-one. I'm at a point now, and it's taken a lot of work, that I can say, I'll refer you out. I can't make it work. Like, and it took me a while. I'm not just like I was in the classroom. It was hard to say no. And that's the other thing I'll say to teachers that are staying in the classroom. Like, it's okay to say no. It was really hard for me to get to a point where I was comfortable telling my admin no and telling my parents no. And even now, I'm finally at a point where I can say, me and your kid just aren't meshing, or I don't have a spot. I don't have to add an hour just to cater to your student or child, or et cetera. And that's the business mind kicking back in. Like, hey, I want to help your kid. I promised you I love your kids and I want to work with them. But I'm at a point now where I can, and it took a whole lot of damn work to get to this point, where I can make my schedule how I want to. And if it doesn't fit for a client, that's okay, because I have some awesome people that I can refer you to that might have space. So the whole group thing, that's why I've transitioned to groups, is just for numbers reasons, not financially, but just numbers, trying to help kids. And also knowing that I would never go to groups if I don't think I can still provide value. there's a point, there's a group, like I very rarely, until it's like exam time, will have more than 3, maybe 4 kids in a group, because then the value decreases significantly. So the value that I can provide, I don't want to work with you or make you pay me X dollar amount if I know I'm not providing the value to you. So that's where I got to that point where it's like, all right, if I keep my numbers at 3 or 4, I keep them mostly same teacher, definitely same grade level, I can provide the same value as I was one-on-one. And I love, there's different one-on-one rates versus small group rates, etc. As I'm building this company and realizing my worth and what I can charge and what I can't charge and what works and what doesn't. And it's challenging. It's hard. That's what people don't see. They're like, yeah, you're just coming with a notebook and a pad and you're taking homework questions. I'm like, no, I spent 2 hours of my kid time just trying to build a schedule. So yes, I have a whole lot more time available, but some of that time is taken up by the behind the scenes stuff.
Absolutely. That behind the scenes stuff is so important. And again, I mentioned before, I was very curious about how the group thing worked, and just the fact that you can lump these kids in depending on their teacher, and that takes so much care and so much scheduling and so many moving parts that it's so cool to hear that. I've never heard that before. And I think that it is so utterly valuable for these kids, because every teacher teaches differently. When you have these groups, they're for the most part, they're all a part of the same teacher as much as possible. And so they're all on the same page. You're getting to know how these teachers work as well. So you're really kind of building this in so many different ways. And, I think one of the biggest things when it comes to running a tutoring business or anything within education is the fear of, is this going to work for the students? And, I think that, sure, there are some huge companies or just some people who are here for the money grab, but it's very clear that you are not that, because that is a concern of yours, right? However, if it's something that works for kids in the group, then it works, and that's great. And you know something? It benefits you, and you deserve it very much so, because putting the time and effort and taking the risk of doing something like this, and taking your experiences and knowledge from the past and bringing it into these sessions, all of that together is what makes your tutoring service great. And for any parents that are listening, not every tutoring service is of the same value. You can find people who are cheaper. Is it going to be worth it? Maybe. Maybe your kid is good with that, and that's perfect. Go for it. But do not base your child's education and conceptual understanding on only the price tag. I understand that economy is a problem and things are going on and money is tight for everybody, right? But at the end of the day, do not simply base it on that. Keep it as a factor, but understand you get what you pay for. For the most part, you really get what you pay for, and it's very evident that you're offering something of high value to these kids.
And I've even about that, just on that point about the price point. Like, I have a couple of colleagues that tutor full time as well, and they've actually come to a point where if the first question a person asks is how much I cost, I refer them out, because if that's I get it. I 100% get it, but she's also at a place, and they're at a place where they can do that. They've built a name that they know their value, and that's for anybody in small business. Outside of tutoring, I know a lot of my friends have gotten their own small businesses off, and you see the memes all the time they post, and it's like, I know it's important for us to know our worth, and it doesn't make you selfish if you are saying, I know what I'm worth.
Absolutely. And I think another important piece of that I wanted to touch on before is that you cannot be afraid to, number one, niche down into how it is that you want to run your business, because that is extremely important. Again, we talked in the beginning about how schools structure and parts of the system can really throttle a teacher's passion, right? And when you become a small business owner, or you are working for somebody else as a contractor, whatever the case may be, you are you want to make sure that passion is no longer throttled. And so don't be afraid to niche down, just as you are doing, because the way you want to do it matters.
And I know, like I say to all my parents, I'm like, if I realize, and I'm honest with them, if I can't provide value anymore, or your student's not getting anything from this, I'm going to tell you, because I don't need or just want your money for the sake of taking your payment. Like, I want your kid to learn, and sometimes people don't mesh. Sometimes things happen. Like, I mean, people are different. So like, that's really, really important to me, is making people realize, like, yes, I charge this set fee, but I'm not charging it just to have your kid come for 30 minutes and hang out. Like, I mean, if they're not doing their part, and I tell my parents honestly, I'm like, do we do math for 30 minutes? I'm like, we have 2 or 3, we have conversations about life, because once they know that I care about that, they're going to learn that math a little better.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to, they just spent an hour in a math classroom in school. A lot of them may not want to be here. So like, I got to do something to make them feel like I care. It's no different than being in the classroom.
Totally, absolutely. Everything that you've said today is really just, it really is incredible, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story, and being, just as I am positive from your stories, you were real with kids in the classroom. You were totally real on this one and authentic, and it was really amazing. I mean, thank you so much for all of this. I've learned a lot from this one, and I definitely look forward to keeping in touch. Is there anything else you'd like to add from your journey that I did not touch upon on this podcast today?
No, I think we covered a lot, and I'm very excited that I got to share not only my story, but also I hope that what I've said is, and as you know, I know, like, you're not running this podcast to tell teachers, leave the profession to go do something else. That's not the point.
Right.
The point is, and I wrote myself a little note before coming on here, and I said, the point of me doing this was, hopefully teachers realize they're more than just teachers. There's options. And I tell myself all the time, like, throughout my teaching career, we define ourselves by the job title of teacher. And for me, being able to make this transition, it's really made me realize I can still be a great teacher without giving up my identity as a human, as a person. And it doesn't make me a worse teacher for making a choice that benefited me. We struggle as humans everybody's seen as, well, if you do something for yourself before somebody else, you're selfish. That's such a negative outlook and so detrimental to your growth as an individual to think like that. Like, people are like, I share my positive stories on Facebook, and I love the conversations I have with kids. And sure, maybe it comes off at, oh, you're being cocky, but like, no, I'm proud. And it's okay to be proud. Yes. In any profession. It's okay to do things for you, even as a teacher. I promise you, your kids are going to understand. The students will get it. Like, at the end of the day, they know they're going to do what's best for them, and sometimes we got to do what's best for us.
Totally. Couldn't agree more. So very well said. I want to add so much to that, and I'm sure we could talk on for days, because that is such a good point, but I really want to leave it at that, because I think it's a really lasting message for people to hear. Chris, where can people find you? So
right now I have my main business page on Facebook is Wik-Ed Math Tutoring. It's just WIK-ED, kind of took wicked, and I'm not from New England, but I use the word wicked. Wik-Ed Math Tutoring, kind of played on words there. So Wik-Ed Math Tutoring, you can find me on Facebook. All my information is there. Super grateful to be here. I'm glad that we connected. I'm glad that somebody from my past was able to connect us and kind of get us together and have this conversation that hopefully somebody listens to and says, it makes sense. I can do it.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you again so much. I look forward to keeping in touch, and everybody listening, go check out Chris's Facebook page. And if you have any questions about leaving the classroom or anything like that, I'm sure Chris would be happy to answer any questions you have. Chris Wickfors, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a great one.